Hello everybody and welcome to this GCSE History exam technique presentation, which is going to focus on two questions from the historic environment section of paper 1, that's a medicine paper. It's going to focus on question 1 and question 2b. Question 2a is covered in another presentation on our channel. Just a reminder that for us the historic environment means the British sector of the Western Front from 1914 to 1918. To access this presentation, you're going to need a copy of the sources from the 2018 examination. If you don't have a copy of these sources, then your history teacher will be able to give you a copy of them. So let's have a look at how this section of the examination will start. Question 1 is going to be a 4-mark describe question, and the question stem will be describe two features of, and then the subject will build from there. In the 2018 paper, the question was describe two features of, and then the topic was blood transfusions on the Western Front during the First World War. Now your answer to this question is going to have two distinct sections to it, and within that each section is going to have two distinct phases. So you're going to need to write one sentence identifying a feature, and then you're going to develop the feature that you've identified with another sentence, which is going to show some developed knowledge of that feature. Then you're going to repeat that for another feature, and then you're going to stop. It's as easy as that. So in total, we're going to write 4 sentences to answer this question, 2 sentences on each feature that you identify. So let's have a look at some examples of answers from last summer's examination series. We've got 2 to look at. One on the left here and one on the right. One is better than the other. Let's have a look at what we've got. Let's start on the left. Blood transfusions had to be done when donor and patient were next to each other. The blood donated had to be used within a day or so they didn't know how to preserve blood. Compare that to the one on the right. From 1915, blood transfusions were used to treat soldiers. They had to be done with the donor in the same room as the patient, as they did not yet know how to store blood. At the Battle of Cambrai, Robertson set up a blood bank as sodium citrate had been discovered. This enabled them to store blood for up to around 4 weeks. 11 out of 20 soldiers treated with this stored blood survived. Now clearly the one on the right is the better answer. What it manages to do is to show some specific knowledge which is linked to the First World War, which is then developed with some further information. Compare that to the one on the left, which does pick up marks. There are some credit-worthy points in there, but it's not specific and it's not linked directly to what's going on the Western Front. So the answer on the right is the one that's clearly better. Now these questions don't take long to do. They're not designed to take a long time. So you might just want to try a few on your own using that common stem to the question that we spoke about. Describe two features of. And if you look, I've got a list here of potential questions that you could try. You might want to give those a go. If you do, obviously you just want to pause the presentation at this point and just get used to that model of identifying a feature and then developing it with some specific knowledge. And then repeating that step. Again, identifying the feature and then developing it with another sentence of specific knowledge. And again, that really is all we need to do. It's as simple as that. In your examination, question 2a is going to be a how useful source inquiry question. Now we're not going to cover that in this presentation. That takes a little bit more explanation. So there's a separate presentation on our YouTube channel for you to have a look at for how to do question 2a. So we're just going to skip straight past that. And we'll skip straight on to question 2b. Now this of course follows on from 2a, but it's the same inquiry that you'd have looked at for question 2a. Now in this case, the inquiry was an inquiry into the treatment of battle wounds by medical staff on the Western Front. And what you'll be asked to do is to develop that inquiry. You'll get 4 statements in which they're going to ask you to show some more specific knowledge and also to build an inquiry for yourself. They will be phrased as follows: a detail in source A that I would follow up, a question that I would ask, what type of source I could use, and how this might help answer my question. So you can see there's progression in those statements that you're going to be asked to work on, and all the time what we're doing here is we're building our own historical inquiry. So let's have a look at the first feature of question 2b. Identify a specific detail from the source. And guidance that we've had from the examiners is simply this. The most easy and straightforward way to pick up a mark here is to quote something from the source. It's to find yourself an interesting, relevant or important aspect of the source and quote it. When we worked on that source in our other presentation, you might remember that we prepared the source in advance and we underlined 1 or 2 things that we thought might be of use to us later on. And this is an ideal moment to use those. Now, if you have a pictorial source that you're going to work from, and in the example that we're going to use here, we are going to talk through a pictorial source, what you're going to do is just simply again going to find an aspect in the photograph, let's say it's a photograph, that you're going to use to develop. And in our case here, let's go for this. The dressing of wounds is being done out in the open on a muddy field. If we were to go for a written source in this question, if that does happen for us, I've just given you a little example here of how your quote might look. And again, just to remind you, it's as simple as writing down a quote from the source in speech marks, and you really are done, and that's your mark that you've got for yourself there. Okay, so let's have a look at the next task that we're going to have in this little sub-question, and that's going to be a question I would ask. Now things start to get a little bit more challenging at this point. Now your question must link to the detail that you identified in the first phase of this answer, and it must relate to the inquiry that we've been given, which is the treatment of battle wounds by medical staff. A good tip here is to try to broaden the detail that you selected. So it might look a little bit like this. Did nurses usually work inside, or was it normal for them to work outside in dirty conditions? And that of course links directly back to what we said for our previous answer. The third aspect of this question is going to be what type of source I could use. Now you must use a specific primary source from the First World War. It is no use writing something like I would use the internet, or I'd use a TV program, or even just a book. What you need is a source coming from the Western Front on the First World War. The list that you've got here is something for you to have at your disposal. You're really going to want to learn these off by heart, and you're also really going to want to know the kind of information that these things could give you. So anything from army records for individual soldiers, a newspaper report, a medical article by doctors, a government report, a diary or personal account, a photograph, hospital records, or army statistics. Of that list, a diary is quite a popular choice for people to go for. That's fine. If you are going to go for a diary, be quite elaborate and be quite specific. Don't just say I'd like a diary. Say whose diary you would like, when you would like this diary from, whereabouts exactly would you like this diary to be from. You can invent your ideal source that you would like to work from. So again, it might look a little bit like this. A Fanny nurse's diary from the Somme after the battle had finished. So you can see there, I've not even just put a nurse's diary. I've said where that nurse is and specifically when in the First World War the diary would be from. Our last subsection is this. How might this help to answer my question? A nice way around this is for you to think along the following lines. Simply, what information would you hope to find in that source that you just identified for yourself in the previous answer? As a historian, how would you use that source? Keep it quite simple here and come straight to the point. It might look a little bit like this, for example. It will show me typical conditions at casualty clearing stations, so I will find out how nurses there worked for most of the war. I hope you can see there that I'm showing the information that I would hope to find in the diary of that nurse that I invented in the previous question. So let's have a look at how one student got on with this last summer. And this is a response that did pick up marks. It's not a great response, but it's a response that did pick up marks. Let's see if we can spot some strengths and maybe some things for this person to develop. So the details to follow up, we've got soldiers being bandaged up and their wounds. A question I would ask is what type of medical treatment was used? The type of source I could use was Army medical records. And how this might help answer my question is, well, this gives an insight of what treatments they were given. As I've said, that does pick up marks. It's not a perfect response though. There are some issues here. I could imagine that the first section does pick up some marks, but the question I would ask is a little bit broad. Then what type of source I could use? Army medical records, well that's okay, but that's not really successfully developed with our last section about how that might help answer my question. That kind of links back to a problem in that the question itself isn't particularly strong. So let's have a look at a stronger response, and again just see if you can compare the two. Detail I would follow up this time is the nurse bandaging the soldier's face. A question I would ask is, what were the role of nurses when treating the wounded? What type of source I could use is diary entries from members of the Fanny who had written detailed accounts of what they had done. And how that might help answer my question is I would be able to read what types of treatment they were allowed to give and conclude how much they helped. So this is a much stronger response. It's specific, the question is strong, and it's relevant historical inquiry that develops from the first point. The source itself that's been selected again contains details of location and whose diary it would be, and that then leads nicely into what the student would hope to find in such a diary. It's easily a 4 out of 4 response. So what you might like to do now is to have a go for yourself. So rather than attempting source A, why not have a go at the same questions? Remember, the questions are common to us, so this is what we can expect to find in any future examination of this type. But try it for source B instead. Okay everybody, thanks for watching. I hope you've enjoyed the presentation. That was of use to you. There's many more presentations for you to have a look at on our channel.